The morning sun cast long shadows across the busy downtown street as David pulled his car into the parking garage beneath the gleaming office tower. He had been dreading this visit for weeks, but he knew it was time. Reports had been coming in through his assistant about problems at the company headquarters, and as much as he preferred to handle things remotely these days, some situations demanded his personal attention. David shut off the engine and sat quietly for a moment, gathering his thoughts. 3 years had passed since the accident that changed everything. The drunk driver who ran the red light had stolen the use of his legs, but not his determination or his business sense. If anything, the experience had sharpened his focus on what really mattered in life and in business. He reached into the back seat and pulled his wheelchair closer to the driver's side. The routine was second nature now, though he still remembered those first few months when every simple task felt like climbing a mountain. His physical therapist had been right when she said the mental adjustment would be harder than the physical one. The elevator ride to the 15th floor gave him time to think about what he might find upstairs. TechFlow Solutions had been his baby for 8 years now, built from nothing more than an idea and a laptop in his garage. The company had grown beyond his wildest dreams, employing over 200 people and serving clients across the country. But growth sometimes came with growing pains, especially when it came to company culture. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, revealing the familiar logo on the wall. TechFlow Solutions, innovation through collaboration. He had personally chosen those words back when the company was just him and 2 college friends working 18-hour days. Now, as he rolled through the reception area, he wondered if those values were still alive in the daily operations. The receptionist, a young woman with bright red hair tied back in a professional bun, looked up from her computer screen. Her name tag read Katie, and David noticed she had been with the company for about 6 months based on the employee database he occasionally reviewed. "Good morning," she said with a genuine smile. "How can I help you today?" David appreciated her professional manner. At least the front desk was maintaining standards. "I'm here to speak with someone about some workplace concerns that have been brought to my attention. Could you direct me to whoever handles employee relations?" Katie's fingers moved across her keyboard as she pulled up what appeared to be a staff directory. "Well, our HR department is actually in a meeting this morning, but our office manager handles a lot of the day-to-day employee issues. Her name is Linda, and she should be available. Would you like me to call her down? Actually, if it's okay, I'd prefer to observe how things operate naturally first. Sometimes you learn more by watching than by scheduling formal meetings." David had learned this lesson the hard way in business. People often put on their best behavior when they knew the boss was coming. Katie nodded understandingly. "Of course. Feel free to have a seat in our waiting area. It's right over there by the main workspace. You'll be able to see how our team operates from there. Can I get you some coffee or water while you wait?" "Water would be great, thank you." As Katie walked toward the break room, David positioned his wheelchair near the waiting area, where he could observe the office dynamics. The space was modern and open, with glass-walled conference rooms and collaborative workspaces scattered throughout. He had approved the design himself 3 years ago, right before the accident, though he had never seen it in person until today. The morning energy was typical of what he remembered from his early days when he worked on site. People moved with purpose. Phones rang steadily, and the soft hum of productivity filled the air. Several employees passed by his waiting area, offering polite nods and smiles. He noticed the diversity of the workforce had improved since his last in-person visit, which pleased him. The company had made intentional efforts to recruit from a broader talent pool. From his vantage point, David could see into several departments. The marketing team was gathered around a whiteboard, brainstorming what looked like a campaign strategy. The development team was deep in code review, their monitors displaying the kind of complex programming that had become the company's specialty. Everything seemed to be running smoothly. Katie returned with a bottle of water and a warm smile. "Here you go. Linda should be back from her rounds shortly. She likes to check in with all the departments first thing in the morning." "That sounds like good management practice," David replied, though he made a mental note to verify whether these rounds were actually helpful or just micromanagement. He had seen both approaches in his years of business experience. As the morning progressed, David found himself genuinely enjoying the chance to observe his company in action. He had built something that clearly functioned well without his constant presence. which was both gratifying and slightly bittersweet. The accident had forced him to delegate more than he ever thought possible, but seeing the results, he realized it might have been the best thing that could have happened to his leadership style. A few employees had approached him with friendly conversation, assuming he was a client or visitor. He kept his responses vague but pleasant, not wanting to reveal his identity just yet. One young programmer had even offered to help explain some of the company's services, clearly proud of the work they were doing. These interactions gave David hope that the company culture was still fundamentally sound. However, he had also noticed some concerning signs. There seemed to be tension between certain departments, and he observed a few interactions that suggested possible communication issues. More troubling were the subtle signs of workplace stress he recognized from his own experience as an employee years ago. Before he had started his own company, the water bottle in his hands had grown warm as he sat thinking about what he was seeing. This visit was supposed to be about investigating specific complaints, but it was turning into something more comprehensive. Perhaps that was exactly what the company needed. Around mid-morning, David noticed increased activity near what appeared to be the management offices. Several employees were glancing in that direction with expressions he couldn't quite read. Some looked frustrated, others seemed anxious. It was the kind of body language that suggested people were dealing with a difficult situation or person. His phone buzzed with a text message from his assistant. "How is the visit going? Do you need me to join you?" David quickly typed back that he was fine, and learning a lot just by observing. He had specifically asked her not to announce his visit in advance because he wanted an authentic picture of how things really worked when leadership thought no one was watching. David was still observing the office dynamics when he heard the sharp click of heels approaching from behind. He turned his wheelchair slightly to see a woman in her early 50s striding toward him with a purposeful expression that immediately put him on alert. Her blonde hair was pulled back severely and her business suit looked expensive, but somehow managed to seem intimidating rather than professional. "Excuse me," the woman said, stopping directly in front of his wheelchair with her arms crossed. "I'm Linda Peterson, the office manager here. I understand you've been sitting in our waiting area for quite some time now." David kept his expression neutral and friendly. "Good morning, Linda. Yes, I've been waiting to discuss some workplace concerns with someone in management. Katie at the front desk suggested you might be the right person to speak with." Linda's eyes narrowed as she looked him up and down, her gaze lingering on his wheelchair in a way that made David immediately uncomfortable. He had experienced this kind of scrutiny before, the way some people seemed to catalog his disability before even considering him as a person. "Workplace concerns?" Linda repeated, her tone suggesting she found the idea ridiculous. "And what exactly would those concerns be? Are you here representing some kind of advocacy group?" The question caught David off guard. In all his years of running the company, he had never encountered this level of immediate hostility from an employee, especially not from someone in management. "I'm here because I've received reports about issues with workplace culture and employee treatment. I'd like to discuss these matters professionally." Linda let out a short laugh that had no humor in it. "Look, I don't know who sent you here or what you think you're going to accomplish, but this is a legitimate business, not some social experiment. We run a tight ship here, and we don't have time for every person with a complaint who thinks they can just roll in here and demand attention." The phrase, "roll in here," hit David like a slap. The casual cruelty of it, the way Linda had deliberately chosen words that referenced his wheelchair, told him everything he needed to know about her character. But he had learned over the years that responding to ignorance with anger rarely produced positive results. "I think there might be a misunderstanding," David said calmly. "I'm not here to make demands. I'm here to have a professional conversation about creating a better workplace for everyone." "A better workplace," Linda repeated mockingly. "Let me guess, you want us to spend thousands of dollars on ramps and special bathrooms and sensitivity training because someone's feelings got hurt. Do you have any idea what it costs to run a business these days?" David felt his jaw tighten, but he maintained his composure. "Actually, I have a very good idea of what it costs to run a business. And I also know that creating an inclusive workplace isn't just the right thing to do, it's good business practice." "Oh, please," Linda said, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Spare me the lecture about inclusion. You know what's good business practice? Hiring people who can do the job without requiring special accommodations. People who show up ready to work instead of looking for handouts or playing victim cards." Several employees had started to notice the conversation, and David could see them exchanging uncomfortable glances. A few had pulled out their phones, though whether to call security or to record the interaction he couldn't tell. The fact that Linda was conducting this conversation in full view of the staff showed him just how little she cared about professional standards. "I'm curious," David said, keeping his voice level despite his growing anger. "How long have you been working here at TechFlow?" 2 years, Linda said proudly. "And in that time, I've streamlined operations, reduced complaints, and maintained the kind of professional standards that built this company's reputation. I don't appreciate outsiders coming in here trying to tell me how to do my job." David almost smiled at the irony, but the situation was too serious for amusement. "Reduced complaints, you said? That's interesting. What methods did you use to achieve that?" Linda's expression became even more hostile. "I made it clear that this is a workplace, not a therapy session. People need to focus on their jobs instead of constantly whining about every little thing. If someone can't handle the professional environment here, they're welcome to find work elsewhere. And what if those complaints were about discrimination or harassment? Then they better have solid proof and not just hurt feelings," Linda snapped. "This generation thinks everything is discrimination. Someone looks at them wrong and suddenly it's a federal case. Well, not on my watch. I've created an environment where people focus on work, not drama." David realized he was getting a masterclass in exactly the kind of toxic management that destroyed companies from within. Linda wasn't just displaying prejudice against him personally. She was revealing a systematic approach to silencing employee concerns and creating a hostile work environment. "I see," David said quietly. "And what about employees with disabilities? How do you handle their needs?" Linda's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Needs? You mean demands? Look, I'm not heartless, but business is business. We can't accommodate every person who wants special treatment. If someone can't keep up with the pace here, maybe they should look for work that's more suited to their limitations." The word limitations hung in the air like poison. David felt the familiar surge of frustration he had experienced countless times since his accident. When people looked at his wheelchair and saw only what he couldn't do, never what he had accomplished. "That's an interesting perspective," David said, pulling out his phone. "Do you mind if I record the rest of our conversation? I'd like to make sure I accurately represent your views when I discuss this situation with the company leadership." Linda's eyes flashed with anger. "Absolutely not. You have no right to record anything in this office. In fact, I think this conversation is over. I don't know who you think you are, but you're disrupting our workplace and I want you to leave immediately." "I'm sorry you feel that way," David replied, keeping his phone visible. "But I have every right to document potential discrimination, especially when it's happening in plain sight of other employees." "Discrimination?" Linda's voice rose loud enough that several more employees turned to stare. "How dare you come in here and throw around legal terms like that? I treat everyone equally. I don't care what color someone is or what their personal situation might be. Everyone gets the same professional treatment from me." David looked around at the employees who were watching the exchange with expressions ranging from shock to embarrassment. He realized that Linda's behavior wasn't just affecting him. It was creating a hostile environment for everyone who witnessed it. "The same professional treatment," David repeated. "Is this how you normally speak to visitors and potential clients?" "You're not a client," Linda said dismissively. "Clients don't roll up here in wheelchairs asking about workplace culture. Clients come here with real business, wearing proper business attire, and treating our company with respect." The mask was completely off now. Linda was revealing prejudices that went beyond disability discrimination into assumptions about class, appearance, and what a successful business person should look like. David realized that employees had probably been experiencing this kind of treatment for months or even years. "I think we're done here," Linda announced. "Security will escort you out if necessary. This is a private business and we reserve the right to refuse service to anyone who disrupts our operations." David remained calm, though his mind was racing. "Actually, I'd like to speak with the owner or CEO about this situation. I believe they would want to know how their company is being represented." Linda's smile was cold and condescending. "The owner is a serious businessman who built this company through hard work and smart decisions. He doesn't have time for every person with a sob story who walks through our doors. Trust me, he would support my handling of this situation completely." As Linda stood there with her arms crossed, radiating hostility and prejudice. David realized that this visit had revealed problems far worse than anything his assistant had reported. The question now was how to handle the situation without making it worse for the employees who had to work under Linda's management every day. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. David could see that several employees had stopped pretending to work and were openly watching the confrontation unfold. Some looked horrified, others seemed resigned, as if they had witnessed Linda's behavior before and knew exactly how this would play out. Linda stepped closer to David's wheelchair, her voice dropping to what she probably thought was a threatening whisper, but was still loud enough for nearby employees to hear clearly. Let me explain something to you. This company was built by people who understand that success comes from merit, not from making excuses or demanding special treatment. We don't need people coming in here trying to guilt us into changing our standards. David felt his patience wearing thin, but he forced himself to remain calm. Years of business negotiations had taught him that losing his temper never led to better outcomes. I'm not asking you to lower any standards. I'm simply suggesting that treating all people with basic dignity and respect should be the minimum standard in any workplace. Basic dignity? Linda's voice rose again, causing more heads to turn. I'll tell you what's dignified. Working hard, following the rules, and not expecting the world to bend over backward for you just because you've had some bad luck in life. The phrase bad luck in life struck David like a physical blow. 3 years of rehabilitation, of learning to navigate a world that wasn't built for wheelchairs, of fighting for every accommodation and opportunity, reduced to bad luck by someone who had never faced a real challenge in her privileged position. Bad luck, David repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the air. Is that how you view all employees who need accommodations? As people who've had bad luck? Linda crossed her arms tighter, her expression becoming even more defensive. Look, I'm not trying to be cruel here, but facts are facts. Some people are better suited for certain types of work than others. That's not discrimination, that's just reality. A person in a wheelchair obviously can't do everything that an able-bodied person can do. That's not prejudice, that's biology. David noticed that Katie, the receptionist, had moved closer to the conversation area, her face pale with embarrassment. He could see other employees texting on their phones, probably alerting colleagues about what was happening. The situation was spiraling beyond what anyone could have imagined when he first arrived that morning. So you believe that a person's physical abilities determine their worth as an employee? David asked, keeping his voice steady despite the anger building inside him. I believe in hiring the best person for the job, Linda replied, as if she had delivered some kind of profound wisdom. And sometimes that means making tough decisions about who can actually handle the demands of a professional environment. This isn't a charity, it's a business, I see. And what about intellectual disabilities? Learning differences? Mental health challenges? Where do you draw these lines? Linda waved her hand dismissively. All of it. If someone can't keep up, can't handle the pressure, can't do the job without constant hand-holding, then maybe this isn't the right place for them. There are programs and services for people with those kinds of problems. They don't need to drag down productive businesses. David realized he was witnessing something truly extraordinary in its awfulness. Linda wasn't just displaying casual prejudice. She was articulating a systematic worldview that dehumanized anyone who didn't meet her narrow definition of what a valuable employee should look like. That's a very specific philosophy, David said quietly. Have you shared these views with the company owner? Linda laughed, and the sound was genuinely ugly. The owner hired me specifically to bring efficiency and standards to this operation. Before I got here, this place was too soft, too willing to accommodate every sob story and special need. He wanted someone who could make the hard decisions and keep the company competitive. And you believe he would support your approach to this conversation? Absolutely. He's a smart businessman who understands that success requires tough choices. He didn't build this company by worrying about everyone's feelings. He built it by focusing on results and surrounding himself with people who share that vision. David pulled out his phone again, and Linda immediately became agitated. I told you, no recording. Put that phone away right now or I'm calling security. Actually, David said calmly, I think the owner should know exactly what's happening here. In fact, I think I should call him right now and get his input on this situation. Linda's eyes lit up with malicious satisfaction. Go ahead, call him. I'd love for you to explain to a successful businessman how his office manager was being mean to you by expecting professional behavior in a professional environment. I'm sure he'll be very sympathetic. David began dialing a number and Linda watched with obvious glee. She clearly believed she was about to witness his humiliation when the company owner took her side against what she saw as an unreasonable complainant. You know what? Linda continued, her confidence growing. When you talk to him, make sure you mention that I handled this situation exactly the way I handle all disruptions to our workplace. Firmly, fairly, and with the company's best interests in mind. I'm sure he'll commend me for maintaining our professional standards. Several employees had now gathered at a respectful distance, clearly torn between wanting to intervene and being afraid of Linda's retaliation. David could see the fear in their eyes, the way they glanced at each other and then looked away. This wasn't the first time they had witnessed Linda's behavior, and they had learned to stay quiet to protect their jobs. While I'm making this call, David said, why don't you tell me more about these professional standards you mentioned? Give me some specific examples of how you've maintained them. Linda was happy to oblige, apparently believing that her actions would be vindicated. Well, just last month I had to deal with an employee who kept requesting time off for what she called anxiety appointments. I explained that everyone gets stressed at work, and that's not a reason to disrupt the schedule. She needed to learn to handle her problems on her own time. And what happened to that employee? She quit, Linda said with satisfaction, which proved my point. If someone can't handle the basic requirements of showing up to work consistently, they don't belong in a competitive business environment. David made a note on his phone. Any other examples? Plenty. There was a young man who kept asking about ergonomic equipment because he claimed he had back problems. I told him that if he couldn't sit in a regular chair like everyone else, maybe he should find a job that better suited his limitations. He also found other employment, I see. Anyone else? Linda was on a roll now, clearly enjoying what she saw as an opportunity to demonstrate her tough management style. There was an older woman who wanted special consideration because English wasn't her first language. I explained that in America we speak English in professional settings, and if she couldn't keep up with basic communication standards, that was her problem to solve, not ours. Each example hit David like another piece of evidence in a case he was inadvertently building. Linda was systematically describing a pattern of discrimination that would make any employment lawyer salivate. But more than that, she was revealing the human cost of her prejudices, the employees who had been driven away from jobs they probably needed and deserved. That's quite a track record, David said quietly. And you believe the owner supports all of these decisions? 100%, Linda replied confidently. He knows that I keep this place running efficiently by not tolerating excuses or special treatment. Results speak for themselves. David finished dialing and put the phone to his ear. Well, let's see what he has to say about all of this. Linda stood there with her arms crossed, practically glowing with anticipation. She clearly couldn't wait for the company owner to put this disabled troublemaker in his place and validate her tough management approach. The employees watching from nearby looked like they were holding their breath, unsure whether to hope for David's vindication or brace for his humiliation. The phone rang once, twice, and then a familiar voice answered. David, how's the site visit going? Learning anything interesting? David put his phone on speaker, and his assistant Amy's voice filled the immediate area around them. David, how's the site visit going? Learning anything interesting? Linda's confident expression began to shift as she processed what she was hearing. The man in the wheelchair had just called someone named David, and that person was apparently expecting a report about a site visit. Her eyes narrowed with confusion. Amy, David said calmly, looking directly at Linda, I'm learning quite a lot. In fact, I'm here with Linda Peterson, our office manager. She's been very educational about how she handles workplace issues. The color began to drain from Linda's face as the pieces started falling into place. Amy's voice came through the speaker with obvious concern. Oh no, what's been happening? Do you need me to come down there? Actually, that might be a good idea, David replied, never taking his eyes off Linda. I think Linda and I need to have a more formal discussion about company policies and procedures. Linda's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Wait, she stammered, who are you calling? And why does she know about a site visit? Several employees had moved closer now, their faces showing a mixture of anticipation and shock. Katie, the receptionist, had her hand over her mouth, clearly understanding what was about to unfold. Other staff members were pulling out their phones, some to record and others to alert colleagues in different parts of the building. "Linda," David said quietly, "I'd like you to meet David Chen, the founder and CEO of TechFlow Solutions, also known as the owner you've been telling me so much about." The words hit Linda like a physical blow. She stumbled backward, nearly losing her balance, her face going from pale to ashen gray. That's not possible," she whispered, looking around at the employees who were now watching with undisguised interest. Amy's voice came through the speaker again. "David, do you want me to call security? Or should I contact legal?" "Let's see how this conversation develops first," David replied, his tone remaining professional despite everything that had happened. "But yes, please head down here. And bring the employee handbook and our discrimination policies." Linda finally found her voice, though it came out as a croak. "Mr. Chen, you're really... But you can't be. I mean, you're in a wheelchair?" David finished for her. "Yes, I am. I have been for 3 years now, since a car accident. But that hasn't changed the fact that I own this company, or that I'm responsible for ensuring it operates according to both legal standards and basic human decency." The gathering crowd of employees began to murmur among themselves. Some were shaking their heads in disbelief, others were taking pictures of Linda's shocked expression. A few of the older employees who had been with the company since before David's accident were nodding in recognition, clearly remembering their CEO even though his circumstances had changed. "But I didn't know," Linda stammered, wringing her hands. "No one told me you were coming." If you had known what?" David asked quietly. "That you shouldn't discriminate against people with disabilities, that you shouldn't create a hostile work environment, that you shouldn't drive away employees because they need basic accommodations." Linda looked around desperately, as if hoping someone would come to her rescue or provide an explanation that would make this nightmare go away. I was trying to maintain professional standards. I was doing what I thought was best for the company. By telling me that people like me have had bad luck and don't belong in professional environments? By describing my wheelchair as a limitation that makes me unsuitable for business? By systematically pushing out employees who didn't meet your personal definition of what a valuable worker should look like? Each question hit Linda like another nail in her professional coffin. She could see her career crumbling around her, and the employees who had feared her for 2 years were now watching her complete humiliation with a mixture of satisfaction and pity. Amy appeared at the elevator, moving quickly toward the group with a folder in her hands and a grim expression on her face. She was a woman in her 30s with short black hair and the efficient manner of someone who had learned to handle crisis situations. When she reached David, she immediately positioned herself between him and Linda, as if protecting him from further harassment. "Mr. Chen," Amy said formally, "I have the documents you requested. I also took the liberty of calling our legal department and HR director. They're both on their way." Linda looked like she might faint. The reality of facing legal and HR consequences was clearly sinking in, along with the full magnitude of what she had done. "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can explain." "This is all a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" David repeated, his voice growing colder. "You spent the last hour telling me that people with disabilities don't belong in professional environments. You described systematic discrimination against employees with mental health needs, physical limitations, and language barriers. You bragged about driving away workers who needed basic accommodations. Which part of that was a misunderstanding?" The employees watching began to exchange glances and whispered comments. Clearly, some of them had been victims of Linda's discrimination, and others had witnessed it happening to their colleagues. The fear that had kept them silent was beginning to transform into something else entirely. "I was just trying to be efficient," Linda said desperately. "I thought I was protecting the company's interests. You hired me to streamline operations and reduce problems. I hired you to manage office operations professionally and legally," David replied firmly. "I never hired you to discriminate against employees or create a hostile work environment. And I certainly never asked you to decide which types of people deserve to work here based on your personal prejudices." Amy stepped forward with the employee handbook open to a specific page. "Ms. Peterson, I assume you're familiar with our anti-discrimination policy, the one you signed acknowledgement of when you were hired?" The one that specifically prohibits discrimination based on disability, race, national origin, and other protected characteristics? Linda stared at the handbook as if it were written in a foreign language. Yes, but I never thought, I didn't realize. You didn't realize that refusing accommodations for disabilities was discrimination? David asked. You didn't realize that making derogatory comments about people's physical limitations was creating a hostile work environment? You didn't realize that pushing employees to quit because of their medical needs was potentially illegal? The elevator dinged again, and two more people emerged. A middle-aged man in a business suit who was clearly the legal counsel, and a woman with graying hair who had the serious expression of someone from HR. Both of them surveyed the scene with professional assessment, taking in the crowd of employees, Linda's obvious distress, and David's controlled anger. Mr. Chen, the HR director said as she approached, Amy briefed us on the situation. Are you all right? I'm fine, Michelle, David replied. But I think we need to have some very serious conversations about how our company policies are being implemented. Linda looked around at the gathering of company leadership, the crowd of employees with their phones out, and the legal representatives who would determine her fate. For the first time since David had arrived that morning, she seemed to fully grasp the magnitude of what she had done. Please, she said again, her voice breaking slightly. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I was just trying to do my job. David looked at her for a long moment, considering his response. Around them, the office had essentially stopped functioning as employees watched the most dramatic confrontation in the company's history unfold in real time. This moment would define not just Linda's future, but the culture of TechFlow Solutions for years to come. The conference room on the 15th floor had never felt more tense. David sat at the head of the polished table, flanked by Amy, Michelle from HR, and Robert from the legal department. Across from them, Linda sat alone, her earlier confidence completely shattered. The employee handbook lay open between them like evidence in a trial. Linda, David began, his voice calm but firm. In the past hour, you've demonstrated behavior that violates virtually every principle this company was founded on. You've admitted to discriminating against employees with disabilities, mental health needs, and language barriers. You've created a hostile work environment and driven away valuable team members. Most seriously, you've done all of this while believing you were acting on my behalf and with my approval. Linda stared down at her hands, which were shaking slightly. I thought I was protecting the company's reputation. I thought I was maintaining standards. Michelle leaned forward, consulting her notes. Linda, in the 2 years you've worked here, we've received 17 formal complaints about your management style. 17. Our HR team investigated each one, but you consistently denied any wrongdoing and claimed the employees were simply trying to avoid accountability. 17 complaints, David repeated, letting the number sink in. That represents 17 people who felt so mistreated that they were willing to risk their jobs to report their supervisor. How did we not address this sooner? Robert, the legal counsel, cleared his throat. With respect, David, the complaints were often vague or difficult to substantiate. Linda was always careful to avoid explicitly stating discriminatory views in official settings. Today was the first time we have clear evidence of her actual attitudes and methods. Amy pulled out her phone. Actually, we have more than just clear evidence now. Several employees recorded parts of today's confrontation. The footage shows Linda making explicitly discriminatory statements and admitting to systematically targeting employees with disabilities and other protected characteristics. Linda's head snapped up. They recorded it? Without my permission? Linda, David said quietly, you discriminated against me in front of dozens of witnesses, then bragged about your pattern of similar behavior. The recording is the least of your concerns right now. Michelle opened a thick folder. I've spent the last 2 hours interviewing employees who witnessed today's events. Many of them shared stories about incidents they had experienced or observed, but had been too afraid to report. The picture that emerges is of systematic harassment and discrimination that has been going on since you started here. For example, she continued, reading from her notes, 3 employees told me about the time you questioned whether hiring practices were getting too diverse, and whether the company was sacrificing quality for political correctness. 2 others described incidents where you made derogatory comments about employees' appearances or accents. David felt his jaw tighten as he listened to the litany of Linda's behavior. Each example represented not just a policy violation, but a human being who had been made to feel unwelcome or unwanted in their own workplace. "There's more," Michelle said. "I contacted the employees who quit during Linda's tenure. 7 of them were willing to speak with me today. Their stories are consistent with what we observed this morning. They describe a pattern of microaggressions, denied accommodations, and hostile treatment that made their work environment unbearable." Linda finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant to hurt anyone. I was just trying to maintain professional standards." "Linda," David said, leaning forward, "let me be very clear about something. Your definition of professional standards is not just wrong, it's illegal. It's discriminatory, it's harmful, and it's completely contrary to everything this company stands for." "But I was efficient," Linda protested weakly. "I reduced complaints, streamlined operations, maintained productivity." "You reduced complaints by creating an environment where people were afraid to complain," Robert interjected. "That's not problem solving, that's problem hiding. And it's exposed the company to significant legal liability." Amy had been quietly taking notes throughout the meeting. "David, I've been reviewing our productivity metrics and employee satisfaction surveys from Linda's tenure. While she claims to have maintained productivity, we actually see declining performance in several key areas. More importantly, our employee satisfaction scores have dropped dramatically, particularly in areas related to workplace culture and management support." David absorbed this information with growing anger. Not only had Linda created a hostile work environment, she had apparently been ineffective at the basic management tasks she claimed to excel at. "Linda," he said finally, "I need you to understand the full scope of what has happened here. You haven't just violated company policy or created legal liability. You've betrayed the trust I placed in you when I hired you to help create a positive workplace culture. You've harmed real people who came to work every day trying to contribute to something meaningful, and you've damaged the reputation and values of a company that dozens of people have worked hard to build." Linda's eyes filled with tears, but David felt no sympathy for her distress. He had seen too much genuine pain caused by discrimination to be moved by the tears of someone who had inflicted it on others. Michelle cleared her throat. "David, legally speaking, we have more than sufficient grounds for immediate termination. Linda's actions constitute gross misconduct, violation of anti-discrimination policies, and creating a hostile work environment. There's no question about our right to end her employment immediately." "What about the legal implications for the company?" David asked Robert. "We'll need to conduct a thorough review of her decisions and actions to identify potential liability. Some of the employees who quit may have grounds for wrongful termination suits, though the fact that we're taking immediate corrective action will help our position. More importantly, we need to implement comprehensive policy changes to ensure this never happens again." David nodded slowly. "Linda, you're terminated immediately. Amy will escort you to collect your personal belongings. You'll receive information about COBRA benefits and your final paycheck, but your access to company systems and facilities is revoked as of right now." Linda looked up with desperate eyes. "Please, I need this job. I have bills, a mortgage. Can't we work something out? Sensitivity training, a written warning, anything?" "Linda," David said firmly, "you spent the morning telling me that people with disabilities don't belong in professional workplaces. You bragged about driving away employees who needed accommodations. You systematically created a hostile environment for anyone who didn't meet your narrow definition of what a worthy employee should look like. There is no coming back from that." Amy stood up and moved toward the door. "Linda, we need to go collect your things now." As Linda rose from her chair on unsteady legs, David spoke once more. "Linda, I want you to think about something. Every person you discriminated against, every employee you drove away, every accommodation you denied, those were real people with families and dreams and contributions to make. The damage you've done extends far beyond this company. I hope you use this experience to examine your attitudes and become a better person." After Linda and Amy left the room, David sat in silence with Michelle and Robert. The weight of what had happened was beginning to settle over him. His unannounced visit had uncovered problems far worse than he had imagined. "David," Michelle said gently, "I know this has been difficult, but you should know that your handling of the situation has already had a positive impact on the staff. Word has spread throughout the building about what happened, and employees are talking about feeling heard and protected for the first time in years. Over the next several days, David threw himself into comprehensive workplace culture reform. He conducted town halls where employees could share their experiences anonymously. He brought in external consultants to review policies and procedures. He established new reporting mechanisms and accountability measures. Most importantly, he made himself more visible in the company's day-to-day operations. The accident had forced him to work remotely, but he realized that his absence had created a vacuum that allowed toxic management to flourish unchecked. 3 weeks after Linda's termination, David received a letter from one of the employees who had quit during her tenure. The young programmer thanked him for creating an environment where discrimination wouldn't be tolerated and asked if there might be opportunities to return to the company. Similar messages arrived from other former employees who had been driven away. The incident became a turning point for TechFlow Solutions. Employee satisfaction scores began climbing immediately. Productivity improved as people felt safe to collaborate and innovate without fear of harassment. The company's reputation in the tech community was enhanced rather than damaged, as word spread about David's principled response to discrimination. 6 months later, David established the TechFlow Foundation, dedicated to supporting workplace accessibility and anti-discrimination efforts. The foundation's mission statement was simple: every person deserves dignity, respect, and opportunity in the workplace, regardless of their physical abilities, background, or circumstances. Linda's behavior had been intended to protect the company's reputation and efficiency. Instead, her discrimination had nearly destroyed both. David's response demonstrated that true leadership meant creating environments where all employees could thrive, and that doing the right thing was always good business practice. The waiting area where David had first encountered Linda was eventually renovated to include better accessibility features and a prominent display of the company's diversity and inclusion values. Employees often pointed it out to visitors as a reminder of the day their CEO chose principle over convenience and dignity over discrimination. In the end, what Linda had seen as weakness, David's wheelchair, his commitment to inclusion, his willingness to listen to employee concerns, had proven to be sources of strength that transformed TechFlow Solutions into a better company for everyone.